I'm glad to have with us today Matt Carlisle and Scott Hutcheson. Now, I know Matt a lot better than I know Scott. Matt's here in I think you're both here in Nashville, but Matt has been a constant member and friend of the RCC. He's participated in the organization. He's given workshops and seminars to our local chapter, to the national office. He's done amazing work he's entered the DeRose Hink House Awards and won several awards over the years, and just been with us for a long time. Matt, I'm going to let you introduce Scott when it comes to you, because I just want to do him justice. So with all that said, that's enough of me, and I'm going to unmute. I guess you're both unmuted, so I'm going to mute myself.
We are. Can everybody hear us okay? Can you hear me okay? All right. Well, it is very good to see faces again. I wish we could see each other face to face, but virtual is perfect and is great for today. And so thank you all for joining with us today. Like you shared, we are coming to you from Nashville. I'm actually coming to you from Franklin, Tennessee, which is just south of Nashville, and Scott is more Nashville proper. And we're joining you from our homes. And I decided in Nashville to suddenly turn into summer. And Scott may start sweating halfway through this because it's getting hot and is in the upstairs of his home. So, but we are here to share with you some of the work that we've done over the many years of working together. And we want to talk to you about the gig economy. That's a new term that that has become kind of a term du jour now for a lot of folks. In that, really, what that means is kind of it's a rapid growth of independent contract workers and a gig economy that offers an opportunity for folks like Scott and I, who are contractors, to work in kind of short spurts, and versus working for an organization as an employee, we do a lot of contract work. And so just to kind of, as a quick introduction of myself, and I'll let Scott introduce himself, but I am owner and racketeur of Big Heart Creative, which we work with nonprofit and faith-based organizations since 2007. I've worked with many of you in different capacities, and we basically either build websites, we do a lot of communication strategy work, user experience design as well. I was more recently worked for Discipleship Ministries as director of web development and CRM, and then also in the past had been director of web ministry for United Methodist Communications, and all of that here in Nashville. The case study that we're going to share a lot about today relates to umcdiscipleship.org, which we'll get more into here in a bit. But it's the flagship website of Discipleship Ministries. And until recently, I had oversight of that website. And we want to share a bit about the work that we did there, Scott and I. Scott, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll jump into our work today.
Yeah, hi, I'm Scott Hutcheson. I've been working with Matt for several years through both Discipleship Ministries. I've also done other work through the Methodist Church for umc.org, the main denominational public website, the Upper Room host of websites. And so it's really been about probably the last 10, 12 years that I've been working with a denomination. Generally, what I do is digital content and user experience strategy is what I bring to the table, as well as kind of getting some of what we're talking about today, which is how to source the right talent for what you're trying to do. Previous to this, I actually also did some strategy work for the Anglican Mission in the Americas denomination just several years ago. And so I keep sort of intersecting the same way Matt does with faith-based and with spiritual-based organizations. And so I've been doing freelance work really for the past 7 years. And so that is kind of how we came together to talk about this topic, because we've seen such great success in sort of gathering teams together like us.
Yeah. And so again, a lot of the work that Scott and I have done is really in trying to identify contractors to help support large projects. And so the dynamic of how you take on a large project, and in this case, a project of a redesign of umcdiscipleship.org, really was transitioning from a point in time where we had utilized large agencies to help support much of the work of design, development, architecture, and then ultimately long-term hosting and maintenance services. And so we had utilized those agencies for a number of years, knowing full well that there's a lot of added costs when you work with an agency. You've got a lot of brick and mortar costs. You've got a lot of when they hire contractors, they mark things up, and or they need to pay for employee benefits, things like that. And so when we moved into this project in, I guess it was 2017, we realized that there was a limited budget, and that we were going to have to do things a bit differently to actually be able to live this out and make it work. And one of the things that had really been on my mind for a number of years is how do we move away from this traditional model of working with agencies and take on some of the responsibility of working with contractors? When you do that, it means that you take on the responsibility, much more of the responsibility of managing those relationships and taking on project management of your project in a more close-knit way. And so, there are some pluses and minuses, but you also save a lot of money, and we'll get into that here in a bit. But at the time in 2017, we were looking at, again, redesigning the flagship website for Discipleship Ministries, which it brings in, there are about over 1 million unique users that come to that website globally in a given year. And those are largely pastors and leaders from within the United Methodist Church that are there solely to acquire weekly worship and resources to prepare for Sunday. And so there's this constant, Scott can tell you, because he really got into the analytics, where you would see a growth on about Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then there would be a dip on Monday or Tuesday, and it was this constant stream every week. And so we knew that it's a big task with a lot of resources, and so it was going to mean juggling a lot of resources in new and different ways. The different roles and responsibilities that we were going to have to take on with this project by us moving to this new model we were going to need to deal with a new user experience or new architecture for the website, a brand new visual design, content migration, which was a massive task, which Scott was brilliant at dealing with. There were 17,000 unique entries in the website, and that does not include images as well as files. But we needed to bring that down. We needed to migrate it from a content management system that was a proprietary content management system to a new open source content management system. And so when you migrate from kind of a closed system to an open system, when you migrate that content, none of it goes easily. And it has to be touched, and it has to be redesigned in a sense. And so that's no easy task. And so we had 17,000 entries that needed to be managed and dealt with in this as part of this process. And then also, of course, a custom development that, we needed to find a developer that was going to be able to do this for us. So this was going to be a major task and with a lot of obstacles. And I'm going to let Scott go ahead and jump into what some of those obstacles were for us.
Yeah, so this was obviously a different model. It started from this budget constraint of knowing that an agency was just simply going to cost more in total. And, Matt and I are certainly not anti-agency. And sometimes that is the right choice. And so some of the obstacles that we sort of had to move through in really discussing that with upper leadership, because I think there's a certain mentality of, well, an agency will be full service and be able to provide everything. How will I know what to do? And so one of the things we did was just kind of move through with leadership and stakeholders about, hey, here's the benefits of working with what we would consider role-based contractors. You're hiring someone either for a long term or even a short term that does a specific task that you need done. And so that is, sort of coming up with, okay, well, what are those going to be? One of the first things we did, because Matt is very experienced with this, is that we kind of started honestly with me. And so the fact that we were able to partner on that, rather than sort of pulling in an agency immediately, gave us the opportunity to move through the process and think, okay, let's think about what stuff we need done and what types of roles we would need to fill that, and then give a loose plan of like, when would we maybe need to onboard these people? So by even having that, and not even having names or having hired people, just by having that, and we went to leadership and said, we're planning out what needs to get done. And then as we need them, we will go and source people to do this work. And this should be more cost effective, and it kind of has an efficiency possibility to it, and that you're sort of bringing people in when you need them, and then they are allowed to go essentially when you don't. One of the things that we were working with that was an obstacle for us is the existing CMS on the site we were redesigning, like Matt said, had been really highly customized. It was not as open source as it could have been, and it really required the agency that was managing at the time to continue to be working with the organization, because that wasn't really intentional on their part, but it was complicated enough that it was difficult for the staff to manage. And so one of the things we wanted to do was move to something that was going to be easier for the staff to manage, so you didn't have to rely on this ongoing continual relationship with an agency. We moving away from that sort of single agency model, did sort of make sure that we had some project management in place. So I would say an obstacle or just a thing to consider would be just, you're going to be managing more of the project, or whoever's at the organization is going to be sort of looking over that day-to-day stuff. So that is a benefit of an agency, is that you probably have a role based doing that, but it's also kind of closer to the metal when you're the one who gets to make these decisions. And so that's what we found, that once we sort of got in the rhythm of being able to manage that, that worked out to be more efficient to us than it was sort of having that sort of almost third party of the agency sort of sitting in between. Some of the things we had to look at was, like Matt said, we had a lot of content. We had a tag structure, meaning that people were tagging content for categories. And we had 750 categories, because people could add whatever they wanted. So we had to move through and try to make sure we got that containable for the next time. And there can be a learning curve to work with providers. So I would say, finding someone that's kind of help you lead that project, that is comfortable with the conversations you would have with designers and with developers and that kind of thing. So when you're looking to source somebody, you think, hey, I might need, a project manager. And that's often a good place to start. There are freelance digital product, website development and other kind of marketing materials, project managers out there. And they tend to be very good at understanding how to have those conversations. One of the reasons why those people are good is that they often come with a short list of people that do certain disciplines that they really like working with. So if you sort of focus your efforts on finding that one good sort of starter person that's going to help you sort of direct and manage the process, they end up knowing lots of good people that they trust, and they would like at least offer you the ability to investigate. So if you're thinking, how on earth would I find all these people? Sometimes that one single source is kind of that starter for helping you find other good professionals. So other than that, like the balancing of the billing, how rates are termed, everyone will probably have their own rates. And so some people will have a little more dollar per hour, some may be project based. And so that is really up to you to decide what is best for that situation. So we'll admit that it sounds like a bit more to manage, but at the same time, it offers the organization a bit more control over how you're able to do that stuff. Whereas an agency would probably present and say, this is kind of the way we work. That's it, take it or leave it. So there are obviously benefits to this. I just went over sort of highlighting a little bit like, hey, there's some challenges to get over. They're certainly surmountable. But to go over some of the benefits of why this worked out so well for us, I'll turn it back over to Matt.
Yeah, I think it's really important to emphasize the fact that changing the way that or maneuvering through the change of moving from a traditional method of working, of doing something differently, is always difficult within the faith-based and nonprofit environment. As many of you probably know, that's not the way that I've heard this a lot. That's not the way we've done it. And so trying to move to this model, a lot of the early work was trying to getting folks to really buy in to the benefits of doing this. And really what it came down to was the financial benefits, and around, we can save money by doing it this way. One of the major things that was a big benefit for discipleship and has been for other clients is they now have full control of their content management system. I have a number of clients that have come to me over the many years, that come to me and they say, I just don't have the ability to manage my website any longer. I have to go to my vendor to make simple changes, or if I want to do some new thing, it just costs me an arm and a leg. And because it is a proprietary system, it's not open source, or they didn't have more direct control over the development of their website. And so by moving to this model, your internal staff, if you've got a staff, or if it's just you have more control over your content management system. You can make direct changes to your website. Or if you do want to add some new bell or whistle, you can go directly to a developer yourself, or to somebody that helped you along in the process and go, hey, I need to add this thing. And you have more control over how that evolves and how that happens. And if you've got the right people in place, you don't have to be a developer to do this. If you've got the right people in place, that you can partner with your folks, and they'll help you through that process. So for example, if in the process a relationship goes wrong or goes bad with one of your vendors, rather than having to fire or let go of the entire agency and throwing everything into kind of chaos, you just are basically removing one part and replacing it. We had to do that with this project, and we'll get more into that here in a bit. But you can easily move in a new partner if need be, and sometimes that does happen. We also are in more control of the timeline. That's another great benefit of it. But you also, again, going back to the financials of this whole thing, you are not having to pay for brick and mortar. You're not having to pay employee benefits. You are directly paying a contractor. And for us, through discipleship and other instances that I've worked, particularly in this project, we were able to see at least a minimum of a 30% reduction in total costs to develop as a result of it. And then long term, those costs are even greater by not working with an agency. And I will reiterate what Scott said, is that we are not an anti-agency. We are simply highlighting the benefits of working with contractors, and that working with an agency oftentimes is the right choice in some cases. But we just wanted to highlight, we wanted to make sure that you were aware of other options. I also want to remind you, if you do have questions, we are watching the chat, so we'll jump in and answer any questions along the way if you've got them. Some of the Scott, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna beef up here. You mentioned the 30% reduction. That happened, and we ended up with, and we'll talk about this more later, but we ended up with essentially, I think, more delivery from the last, because we actually worked on the previous version of the website as well, and we realized we had more value delivered for less money. So we actually went up in like what we actually got out of the project, even though we went down in costs.
Yeah, I'm gonna walk through real quick some of the roles that have to play a part in this, played a part in this project, and how we, what kind of responsibilities or folks that we're looking for throughout that. One is a project manager, which Scott mentioned earlier. They basically are overseeing the project timelines. They see the big picture. They're able to see all the different phases of the project. They're managing schedules. They're encouraging people, encouraging vendors, checking in at the right time. They're able to negotiate any conflict. They're delivering the project in scope and on budget. In this case, I was a project manager. We did that, and we took that on internally. Like Scott said, you can also hire external project managers, and I will share with you, there are folks that are project managers that have gone through this process that really are experts at help. Their job is to really help you through. If you've never done it before, they hold your hand throughout the whole process and educate you along the way. And those are the kind of project managers you really want to look for, the folks that are educators and are great listeners as well. Another one is a user experience designer. That is what Scott does. He is an incredible user experience designer. He they lead you through the discovery process, and ultimately the deliverables are delivery of wireframes, site maps, a new site architecture, and Scott played lots of different roles in this, not simply just the user experience designer, but also, as he mentioned earlier, dealing with the tags, which also became an architecture within itself that ran kind of parallel to the overall architecture of the website. It drove what content went where, and based on how things were tagged. They also, a user experience designer also helps you see what organizations often miss. I will always encourage an organization to bring in someone else to do discovery for your project, to talk to your constituency, your users, because if you try to do it yourself, you oftentimes don't see those things that are right there in front of you because you're so connected to a project or an organization that it's easy to overlook. And I will do the same thing. And if I have projects that I have ownership of, I will hire outside vendors to do discovery just simply because I know that I'm too close to it. Another role is a user interface designer or a visual designer. You can oftentimes find a great UX or user experience designer as well as a user interface visual designer. They sometimes are one person and they can, serve both roles. But there are lots of visual designers out there, but to find one that really knows web is also very important. And then ultimately your developer or your programmer. Oftentimes you'll find them come as a team, and it could be multiple people depending on the size of the project, or you can find an independent developer. Oftentimes folks will, I personally like to find developers that I can communicate with. And, they have this reputation of developers aren't great communicators, but they really need to be. They need to be great listeners, and they need to be able to communicate back with you and express back to you what they're hearing. And they also have a long track record of delivering on time. And then, in our case with this project, our developer transitioned into long-term, they took on the role of helping to maintain the code and any additional development they helped to maintain down the road, after launch of the website. And so we, really built a great relationship with that person, and they, were, bought into the whole project and saw the larger vision, and they were, great to work with. A long-term developer is somebody that if you call them in the middle of the night and the website is down, they're going to answer the phone, or they're going to have some plan in place to be able to be responsive 24 hours a day. And better yet, you want a developer of someone that is always thinking ahead. And so before it becomes a problem, they're identifying those problems before they become a crisis. And that's the kind of partnership you need. That is a big task. That's a big list, but I'm going to let Scott share with you how to find these folks.
Yeah, it's a good segue. I'm going to hit a few questions that are really relevant that we had in the chat that really lead into this well. My next section is actually about how to find contractors. And Jan, you mentioned Upwork as being a little iffy sometimes. I'm going to sort of help you sidestep that. I did notice someone said, well, it was the right from the council, said you use project manager role as the single point of contact for the client, kind of like a GC. That is exactly the model that I would describe that as. And so that's what when we'll talk about how to source these people, that's what you're generally looking for, especially if you're like, I'm not really sure what to do in this situation. Having them as that single point of contact for you, because especially if you're working with lots of different professionals, as you hire those people, you simply say, hey, this is the person managing the project with us. You can communicate with them. And that way they'll know what stuff you need to know about. They'll be, if they're good, they'll know what stuff that, they don't need to bother you with this, so that you've got a little bit more time to think about the sort of the top of the project. You did ask, oh, go ahead, Matt.
Let me jump in about the contracts. There were a couple of questions that kind of relate to one another around contracts.
Yeah.
And that you've got essentially two different options, two different ways of contracting. And this is how I did it with this project specifically, is that there would be a deliverable based contract. So I'm going to deliver to you a fully developed website based off of these wireframes and this visual design, and it's going to cost X amount of money. And this is the proposed timeline and phases of this project. That's one way of doing it, to where it is a flat price. The other one is one where you pay based on hours. That's a tough one, because sometimes it's the unknown, and you've got a set budget. And I think if your budget is more fluid, or you have more funds, then that might be a better model to go with, because sometimes by reducing those hours, or really managing those hours with that contractor, then you can get more bang for your buck. But sometimes if it is sort of open-ended and it's this hourly rate, then it can get out of control. What we would do is, to kind of curb that, is we would go, okay, we are going to do hourly, but there is a cap of so many hours per month that you can work. And so it's on me as project manager or project owner to monitor that. And so what I would do is I would have my contractor track their hours. There's tons of different tracking systems out there for them to track hours. And I would ask them, when they sent me a bill, don't send me a bill for, 10 hours at X amount of money. I want to know what you did. And that as a contract owner, that's my right to know. And so they can track those hours, and it's helpful for me to know kind of how we're spending our time, that kind of thing. I think that hopefully that answers your question. Scott, back to you, Ben.
Yeah, and I'll my personal experience, just to kind of give some color to that, the right situation between myself and Discipleship Ministries was I was on a retainer. And so I said, hey, I've got this many hours that I will guarantee I have the capacity to give you. And I'll this is how much money per month it would be. And so it kind of gave a sense of regularity to it. That worked for us because I was working so closely with Matt. I back when we were spending time in offices, I would go to the physical because I was in town, and I would meet with him during the week, several times a week, to the point that I actually had a badge. They were tired of coming to get me at the door. So here's your badge. And so that worked for me. But I think, when you come to those arrangements, I had a history with the people there. So the idea that, hey, is Scott going to use up all these hours? Like, we're giving him this X amount of money, that was really not a question, because there was a sense of trust, to be honest. So I think that really comes down to a sense of relationship that you have with the person. Do you feel like you're getting the value you need out of the money you're paying? And so I really think that kind of attends to, what is the contractor or the person you're hiring say, hey, here's how I do it. And just kind of mitigating that. Again, you're going to get several different probably arrangements depending on who you're hiring. But back to how do you find these people? Like, how do you find good people? I would say the first warning is it's probably not going to be your sister-in-law's cousin's roommate, unless that person just happens to be a really expert professional at the thing that you're looking for. And so I would say you're really looking for a kind of a linchpin person. This could be honestly any one of the roles. And so I think, in thinking through this, commonly, if you're talking about building websites or digital marketing, or sort of, this kind of stuff, building products, and we're all talking about sort of interactive stuff here, sort of the main elements would be a designer, a developer, and probably that project management role. And so as you sort of think through, I need to find someone who really fits both my price and, has the background I need. As you start sort of, if you find that person, and I'll talk a little bit about finding an individual person in a second, but they tend to be, like I mentioned before, really good resources, because they probably have worked with people, because they're an independent person. They know other people who do independent work. And sometimes we've worked with people who have recommended small agencies, 2 or 3 people. So it is technically an agency, but it's a really small, very nimble set of people, as opposed to sort of a large full house. And generally those places do very specific type of work. They only do, a digital ad placement or something like that. But, I would say, kind of put your effort into, like, gosh, I got to hire half a dozen different roles. I would say it's sort of that effort you're thinking, I really need to make sure I get a good person. That can start with what I would call your entry person, one of those main roles: project manager, developer, someone who's actually programming the site, or the designer. And if you get someone who's experienced, they say, oh, I've got a short list of people you should look at that I really trust, that I've worked with before. They may be able to fill that in for you. And so that, I think, now you've got a working relationship with someone who knows how to work with your other contractor. And they've sort of setting their reputation on the line to say, hey, I'm going to tell you, I believe this person will do a good job, and you should investigate them, because that's, if I recommend someone, I'm going to be pretty sure that they're going to do a good job. And that also gives them the opportunity to do that, because they kind of know what they're looking for. They're a professional in this space, where you may say, I'm not really sure. How do I know if someone's good? And so that's one of the ways you can do that, is sort of start with one role and say, hey, I'm really looking for your advice. But how do you even start with finding this, this great person? Honestly, I would say, start with, the 2 things that have worked well for me in sourcing people and even in finding work. And that is just networking and, honestly, LinkedIn. So I know Upwork was mentioned, and some of these sort of freelance sort of sites out there. That does tend to be hit and miss. It's not that there aren't, really exceptional professionals on there. But you can advertise on LinkedIn, and you can really get specific and say, we are looking for someone who's a contractor. I do not want to hire someone full-time. This is it. These are the dates sort of generally that we think we'll need someone. And here's what we're looking for them to accomplish. And then it is just like hiring someone for your organization. While you might not be going through the same sort of rigmarole of benefits and stuff, it is, you're hiring someone. So I think you should think about it in that way, from an interview standpoint, from a references standpoint. Anyone, just like an employee, if you said, hey, I'd love to talk to some people you've worked with before, I'd recommend doing that. And like most really reputable people be like, oh, fantastic. I've got a list of half a dozen people that you can just choose to call or connect with. And you can kind of ask them what it was like to work with me. And so, I would say, consider advertising somewhere like LinkedIn. Go out and ask your colleagues. Just send an email out and say, hey, I'm kind of looking for these roles. If you have an individual contractor that you've worked with, let me know. Sometimes that connection can lead you to someone and say, hey, I'm not the right resource for you because of scope or timing or something like that. But professionals know other professionals. And so the fact that you're connecting with someone, they go, yeah, here's what I'm looking for. As someone who's independent, it gives me great joy to find another professional that does what I do if I'm not available for something or it's not a right fit. Someone who I really trust, and say, hey, let me get you connected with so-and-so, because that's just good professional camaraderie. I don't take any money from people like this. It's just sort of good professional courtesy. It's good for this potential client that I could have worked with maybe in the future, and is obviously good rapport with the person I'm recommending. So I think if you find a good person, rely on them. Also, I would say look out, professional organizations. Most cities, if you're near a metropolitan area at all, usually have some sort of an organization of people that have a discipline. They're developers or they're designers or something like that, or it's a marketing organization that has kind of a conglomeration of different skill sets, and just go to them and say, hey, I'm looking for someone with this profile. Can you help me out? And those organizations kind of exist to help people network and connect with other people. So I'd say a professional organization that is kind of connected to something that you do, whether it be interactive or marketing or websites or something. Those are good places to go to find people who are certainly engaged enough in their practice that are willing to join and be part of a professional organization. The final thing I'll say when you're thinking, okay, I got to write a job description or something about this, like I'm not even really sure what tasks they need to do because this is not my area of expertise. I would say, be less prescriptive and more descriptive. Here's the problem we're trying to solve. We're planning to create a new website. We're planning to do a digital marketing campaign. Say, this is what we want to accomplish. You certainly don't need to put your budget in there or anything like that. And you say, like, here's our timeframes, and just say, here's our goals. We're hoping to achieve these kind of things. A website we can manage, all on our own. Something that helps us display a bunch of events that we want to do. These are sort of the high points. And let that person who responds to you say, hey, here's how I recommend doing that, so that you don't feel burdened to come up with, well, I don't know how to put every single task they need to do in. Really, you're saying, I've got a goal to achieve. Someone respond to me that thinks they're really good at achieving this goal, and you tell me what you think you would do, and then you'll be able to see how eloquent are they at describing it, what kind of projects have they mentioned that sound like what you're doing. And I think that's a really good sort of way to start that. But again, I would say, to sum up, go for those professional organizations, go for that networking, and really look for that one good professional to kind of help you start that process of recommendations and sourcing people.
One of the key learnings for me personally in this process, particularly in this case study with Discipleship Ministries, was really learning how to manage the relationships with the contractors. And what I mean by that is, when we first started, my intent was, okay, as project manager, I'm going to keep all of my contractors kind of doing their work in kind of their buckets of time, right? And so my user experience person is going to be working at this time. And what I realized over time was that for them to buy into the larger vision, the big vision for this project, they needed to know who they're working with. And so rather than trying to keep them in, kind of separate silos, it was really important that I included everyone throughout the project. So many of our, weekly, bi-weekly project meetings, I would include the developer in the design during design meetings. So they would know what they're going to be developing. And so when Scott was presenting the wireframes, I would have the developer in the room so they could hear why that needs to be labeled that way, why that button needs to be labeled that way, and how and what the action is going to be or the interaction is going to be on this page, so they could really understand from discovery that every pixel on the page has a reason for being there, and there's a reason for it working that way, and to improve that overall user experience for the user. But so once we started doing that, then the camaraderie happened, the relationship building happened, and they started to contribute to suggestions in a good way. And not to say every idea was a great idea, that we followed through with every one of those ideas, but at least they were part of the team, they were part of the process, and that became huge. And so by the time we got to the end of this thing, we were really very unified. And so that's really critically important for maintaining those long-term relationships with your contractors. As I shared earlier, we did have 2 instances where the relationship didn't work out. It was a big, long project that took us, Scott, how many years? Like 3-4 years.
Yeah, 22 months of actual sort of development work, and then planning before and after that.
Yeah, and so it was a lengthy process, and in that process, we had a developer that, just as I shared, they just were not good communicators. They were not listening. They didn't hear kind of what we were sharing, and ultimately, when it got down to it, they were like, you know what, this isn't working out, and we felt exactly the same way. And because we were in a contracted relationship, we could just move on, and we could bring somebody else in, and it was mutual. They realized that it wasn't working out, and we did the same thing. And so it's not always a bad thing to be transparent and say, you know what, this isn't working out. And that's always a tough conversation to have, but in the long run, you're better off. In a lot of ways, you're better off for it by just being very upfront about it. Like I said, we would meet regularly. We, Scott and I seem to be meeting practically every day, but we would have team meetings at least twice a week throughout. And so that really helped to, for planning purposes and being clear about expectations and timelines. But communicating well and being transparent, bottom line, are mission critical to any one of these projects. And I will say that the process and what we just outlined with umcdiscipleship.org and with the website can be utilized in an app, in developing any other application of any kind, and doesn't have to just simply be a website. I mean, it's the same process for many, many other things. And I utilize it all the time, particularly for communication strategy work and other work that I'm involved in. It's pretty clear cut. So I will open with that. I'm going to open it up to questions. It looks like we've got a couple questions. I don't know if you've looked at them, Scott, or not.
Yeah. I saw that an hourly rate one. If you're hiring the right people, they'll probably come with something in mind. So I think, like I said, those could be different. So as far as like what's the best practice to ask the contractor, should I ask them? They probably will come to you and say, my rate is $60 an hour, or my rate's $100 an hour, depending on kind of what they do. And that's why you'll see that difference. Some people's rates will be more because the work is more specialized. And that's just kind of how it works out. That's not one of the benefits, is that sometimes a certain person's rate per hour will be more because of the type of expertise, but you might not need them for as many hours. We worked with a contractor. It was, again, a small agency of like 3 people named Love and Science, and they helped us set up the measurement for the analytics of the site, because that was going to be really important to us. And so, I'm not gonna lie, they were pricey. Like they were a very good, well-respected firm. In fact, they're on the Google's top 50 list. Like Google considers them the top 50 data scientists in the country, but they didn't do a tremendous amount of work for us. They did a very focused type of work, and so that work, in the grand scheme of how much did it cost us, wasn't a large cost, even though we might have looked at the hourly rate and said, "Wow, that's kind of high." But it was so focused that we got that without. If it had been an agency, you're sort of just paying the same rate, no matter what you do. To the question of platforms for project management. Someone mentioned Asana down here. I think that is a good choice. Monday.com is a very similar one. I think both Monday.com and Asana have similar learning curves, which was what was mentioned down here. I think about, was it Heidi that mentioned that they're dense. And so I think ones that are a little bit sort of less heavy would be things like Trello. And as a Kanban board, and so you're just looking at like lines of tasks, and it's a little bit easier to kind of figure out like this is in process, this is coming up in the future, this is completed. It's got a really sort of focused way. And then Basecamp. Basecamp has been around for almost decades now, and it continues to be a pretty solid choice for a communication platform and to track what tasks need to get done. If you end up starting, finding that project manager person or that person that sort of is going to help you organize things, they often come with that. They say, "Hey, you know what? I always use this thing and I will take care of maintaining that thing." So there's not something that feels like it's a learning curve for you. At the same time, you'll find that those project managers and other people, whether it's a designer or developer or someone else, if you're freelancing, you tend to go with what the client has. Yep. And so good people are like, "Yep, I've used that." I mean, personally, I've used everything I mentioned plus half a dozen other ones, to do this work. And so like, you're like, "Yep, I've totally worked with that platform." And that's usually something that will happen anyway, is that you'll sort of show up with this a platform that someone goes, "Yep, I got it." But again, recommendations from professionals about what they use or Basecamp, Trello, and those kind of things are nice, simple ones.
Yeah, and don't overlook as simple as an Excel spreadsheet too. And that for, like Scott said, a good project manager is able to roll with whatever the organization is using. And so if you're an Asana organization, then you ought to be able to just jump in and work with that and be okay. And because, a lot of them are very similar in structure and nature. But I think that for many projects, especially if it's a smaller project and you want to kind of keep it lo-fi and not, confuse people with a lot of different, it can be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet of saying, these are the things we're going to do. And this is our timeline, and these are the deliverables, blah, 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 that kind of thing. And so it can be as simple as that. Somebody had a question about how do you come up with a fee structure, particularly for clients in faith-based organizations with the budgets or shoestring. It depends on your budget. If it's a small budget, then you know where your parameters are. You know what you can spend. And that most likely means that you're going to have to carry a lot of the weight of taking on project management, or you need to say, "I'm going to invest my time or invest my money in more of a project manager, of somebody that can help me through this process and give me guidance on how to reduce my costs." You can start looking at different platforms of, like, for example, WordPress, and, and reducing your cost by going to an open source platform versus a proprietary platform. We use with Discipleship Ministries with this project, we use Craft, which is similar to WordPress, but at more of a higher level. And absolutely. And if you're asking me what my favorite content management system is, there's WordPress and then there's Craft. And I really love Craft for larger projects, for larger websites. And then WordPress in a lot of cases will cover most organizations, but Craft is pretty spectacular. But it really comes down to what that budget is, and trying to, you may not be able to get all those different roles for, for your costs, but it also means that you might need to take more time to go, maybe I can find a developer that can help me in different, and take on different roles.
Yeah. And I would say, there's this, I think a mentality has been sort of up, with, if you're used to working with agencies and this kind of thing, of that there's almost an opponent relationship. You're like, oh, I've got money and you want money, like, are we going to sort of play kind of a game here? And I think that, I've had success both in helping my clients source people and in being someone who's been asked this question, of being, as transparent as you can about saying, hey, my budget is blank. Here's the goal I want to accomplish. Mostly when you're in a conversation with someone, say, here's my budget to accomplish this thing. This is what I am able to get. And here's the goals we want to reach. Is that something that you can do? I think, there's this sense of like, the person's going to go, oh my gosh, it's $30,000. It just so happens my fee is exactly $30,000. I find that honestly doesn't happen as much if you're working with reputable people. People want to be honest about, what things cost, but also, the nonprofit status of what you do, especially if you're lucky enough to connect with someone who is connected to your mission. That honestly, that can go a long way. So, back to sourcing people, if we're all in organizations that have people connected to it because they have, a philosophical or spiritual belief that is in some way connected to what you do. And so, hey, there's a great networking opportunity. Maybe there's someone in there, and because they're connected to a similar mission, in a similar path forward, they may say, hey, let me figure out how I can work with you. And like, yes, I see you have this limit of a budget. Let me tell you what you could do for that. And sort of start asking them. So it's more of a relational thing of saying, hey, I've got this, help me figure out what I can accomplish, and just looking for an honest conversation, because at some point, everyone's going to sort of talk about that money issue, but making the money issue more of a tool rather than something you feel like you have to sort of hold too closely.
Yeah, and I would encourage you with any project to put out an RFP, a request for proposals. And that's always a good way to kind of measure cost. And, we would, with any major projects, if we're looking for a developer, for example, we would put out a request for proposal, an RFP, and we would send it specifically to different vendors that we knew either developed to that platform, were recommended, that type of thing. And or we would just release it and see what we would get. And, sometimes we would get 3 or 4 back. In many cases, we would get 25 or 30 or more. And you have to kind of sludge through those options. But at least it gives you kind of a gauge on what you're dealing with. If you don't know what you don't know, an RFP is a great way to kind of give you a gauge on what those costs are gonna entail. If you're gonna do that, I think you do need to follow through with something, and I don't think you should just put them out there just to gauge. But I think you definitely need to have plans to follow through with the build. Question here from Heidi. What can we accomplish for X amount, and or can we recommend someone who could do XYZ for
I think Heidi is saying essentially thumbs up.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, that's a good way. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Other questions? Scott, any other ideas or thoughts pop up?
Let's see if we did anything. I would say, the last thing, to wrap up with is that, we ended up with a really good result.
Yeah.
But, this was I don't say roll with the punches project. And I think that's just kind of how it's the main thing about working with contractors versus an agency is that there will be less structure. Agencies tend to be like, you're going to have a meeting twice a week and do this, and it's sort of very intensive. And sometimes that's the right thing because that's what you need. I think just allowing yourself to get used to this sort of looser structure, because it gives you while there's more decisions to make, sometimes it also gives you more freedom. And so there's less sort of rigidity of having to meet all the time. There are a little bit more leeway with how you get to ebb and flow with the work that happens.
Scott, why don't you share some of the statistics and measurements?
Oh, yeah.
What we saw from ultimately.
Yeah, so as we wrap up here, I'll say, our per year for the project that we built, we're getting in excess of 1 million users a year with about just under 6 million page views for about 2.2 million sessions. Now, one of the interesting things we found for the project we built was that 67% of the users are on a mobile device for their session. So, for the Methodist Church, there were a lot of people, in small churches, maybe in rural areas, who are preparing for worship. And on Sunday morning, they're reviewing their notes from the website on their phone and that kind of thing. And so, we had people who, now we had in the past year, that website had about a little under 200,000 sessions that extended past 10 minutes per session. So we know that people are digging into this website. We know that people are really consuming the content. And I think one of the reasons we were able to have this, we used 6 contractors over the course of about 20 or plus months to get that done. And I think one of the reasons we were able to see this is that, we were able to hire the people who weren't just good at what they do, but fit us the best for their discipline. And that's not always the case in an agency. Sometimes the designers are great and the project management's weird, or the developers are really talented and you wish you had more from design. This sort of, moving together and getting this sort of the A team, so to speak, the crew together kind of allows you to find not just people that are good, but people that are the right fit for you for each discipline.
And Camille, I think that I'm pronouncing your name correctly, is you are spot on in that one of the other added advantages to any project like this is diversity. And by hiring contractors, it is critically important that you have folks that are not just always saying yes, but have diversity of thought, that come from different backgrounds and likewise. And so it is, was always really important to us and was really a mission of the project to make sure that it wasn't homogenous. And in a lot of ways, that's what you hope, you don't get from an agency. And by managing your own project, you can control that. And I'm pleased to say that occurred in this project. So thank you all so much for your time today. It is always a pleasure to speak with RCC and this whole group. I feel like I've been speaking to this group for 15, 20 years now. I wasn't so gray back then. And I know Greg wasn't, others weren't either. So, but thank you for your time and I appreciate it very much. And Scott, thank you so much for everything you've done with it, particularly for this project. And I hope that you all will, try to learn more about the work that Scott and I do. And if you do have interest in reaching out to us, I think our website addresses are down there somewhere I'm bigheartcreative.com. And Scott, what's your URL again?
The strategicweb.com.
The strategicweb.com. And so we would love to hear from you and talk more about your projects or any questions you might have. We would love to hear from you. So, but thank you all for inviting us and listening to us today.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Scott, so much for not just today, but just for the work you're doing that helps lift up the world around us.